Antonio, thank you for joining us. Obviously, we're trying to make heads and tails of this Cyprus situation. How big of a deal is it to the broader markets?
I think it's relevant to the extent that there's a consideration for a potential haircut on depositors, which is something new. Remember, something that has not happened so far in this crisis is that not a single penny has been lost by depositors within the Eurozone. And so that was a bit of a red line. So it can potentially be important.
Antonio, I'm looking at the Cyprus situation and wondering, people have described this as a bail-in. Take the money out of the Cypriot depositors and use it to fund a rescue of sorts. Does this say anything about the way the IMF in particular and perhaps the EU are looking at future crises in peripheral Europe? That's no longer going to be a bailout followed by austerity, that it's going to be a bail-in, whether it be with depositors' money, whether it be with senior bondholders' money?
I think in that way Cyprus is a bit of an outlier. I mean, look at the size of the banking system, which is multiples of GDP. Just the depositors are actually over 4 to 5 times GDP. So it would make sense actually in this scenario to bail in. I think it's a case by case. What is clear to me is that evidently Europe is moving towards a bank resolution regime, and that bank resolution regime can actually come sooner rather than later. And there, for the next banking crisis, you will see a decision walking through the capital structure of the bank, starting with equity, moving to junior debt, then senior debt, and if the bank needs to be resolved, potentially large depositors.
So what happens next? How does that move towards a bank resolution regime play out?
Well, I think, there's a draft circulating already for that, but if you remember, the implementation was scheduled for 2017-2018. I think what this crisis is going to do is accelerate the application of that. So, in my view, we are likely to see an implementation of a bank resolution regime, a pan-European one, starting perhaps in 2015. And as I mentioned, once they need to resolve a bank, and once that a framework is set up for all euro area countries, they will walk down the capital structure of the banks and to minimize the taxpayer cost. And that's right now a first experiment here in Cyprus.
Antonio, if we do get a run on the banks in Cyprus when they reopen, is the $10 billion bailout going to be meaningless because a run would be more significant?
I think, we should expect some deposit outflows, certainly. But keep in mind that the ECB is there, right? Once you have a program in place, you have the ECB, and Cyprus, as the size of the Eurosystem resources, is really very, very tiny. So I think the ECB will be there to provide ELA as long as needed in order to calm and stabilize the markets. That's what the central banks are there for. In moments of crisis or financial instability, you need to supply as much liquidity as needed.
Speaking of calming and stabilizing the market, Antonio, why aren't European officials doing more to calm the people, say, in Spain or Portugal, in Italy, who might be looking at their deposits and wondering what kind of a haircut they might have to take?
I think the statement that we got yesterday night by the Eurogroup recommending no haircuts to deposit insured, that is to depositors with resources under 100k euros, goes a little bit in that direction. And you see some statements in Germany, and I will not be surprised that you will see more statements in all these countries.
But Antonio, if you've got money in a Spanish bank and you've got a deposit in excess of 100,000 euros, why wouldn't you be moving it to a German bank right now?
Well, that depends on the bank, no? If it's a strong bank, and why should you? The question is whether you're going to leave money in a very weak bank that may have to go through a second round of recapitalization, and in that case, as I mentioned earlier, they may think through the whole liability structure to minimize the impact. So it very much depends on bank-by-bank cases. I think what this crisis does is there is going to be even a more of a separation between the strongest banks and the weaker institutions, and the markets